today, I want to devote my words to gratitude to our UU ancestors. And you know, there are so many ways to tell the history of Unitarian Universalism and the ancestors who are part of that history. One can look at the paths of Universalists and Unitarians separately since the beginning, and then end or even begin with the decision of the merger between the two U's that happened in 1961, and that has solidified the kinds of principles and values, the covenantal values that hold us together. We are indeed a non-creedal religion, but that doesn't mean that we don't believe in anything. We hold to our covenant. Well, one way of looking at our UU ancestors also is to look among celebrities around us, especially in our country's history, who are or who have been Unitarian Universalists. You will find names like William Henry Thoreau, Ralph Waldo Emerson, Susan B. Anthony, Clara Barth, and many, many more names that you thought, oh, I didn't know this famous person was a Unitarian or a Universalist or both. There is an online dictionary, the Dictionary of Unitarian Universalist Biography. It has hundreds of entries, and if you want to look anybody up, that's the place to look. You can just go online and look for the acronym DUUB. It will come up as the first option, I think, and then you can scroll very easily and look for the person that you're interested in. Thankfully for all of us, I chose not to go through much of that for today. It's cumbersome and long, and also there are so many thousands upon thousands who are not in the dictionary and who have contributed to this ancestry. So what I'm going to do instead, I've been thinking about this for a while, and I decided to begin where our faith ended up, with a set of principles and values. Nowadays, we recognize 6 values, and I'll pick 4 of them. Not that those are the 4 most important ones. All of the 6 values are connected with one another, so it doesn't really matter which one we talk about. But I'm picking 4 by name, and I'll mention 1 or 2 people whose lives and work have exemplified this value among our UU ancestors. And I purposefully, for today, chose names of people that most of you may not know, may not have heard of. I think some of them you have, but they're not among the top people that we think about. So I'm going to begin with what seems to be one of the newest of the principles and values, and that is the interdependence of all living things of which we are a part. And actually, when you think about it or read about it, it's not such a new idea. Universalists are among us, and they visualize a common destiny after death for all living beings. So in a way, that is kind of touching on interdependence of all those living things. And these Universalists have existed around the world, and certainly in the Judeo-Christian tradition, for thousands of years. If all after death have the same destiny, this also shifts our emphasis for our religious life to the here and now, because we don't have to think about the afterlife. We're all there together. So we focus on the here and now. And you see this well reflected in the early Gospels, for example. They are filled with recommendations of how to live a good life here and now. And interestingly, this is also consistent with the way religious humanism sees their religious purpose, focusing on the here, on the now. And this universalism is also consistent with seeing ourselves as living on a planet that is not just to be used as a resource, but that is itself a living thing of which we are part. All of our bodies are made up of the same stuff, stardust, if you will. And these ideas have a long historical development, and in Unitarian Universalism, the transcendentalists, as they're called, are often mentioned in that development. People like Thoreau and Emerson. But today, let me focus on a much lesser known universalist to whom we owe gratitude. Her name was Eliza Topper Wilkes. She was born in 1844 and died in 1919. She preached that human beings are guests in the community of all life. So this idea existed very early among Unitarian Universalists as we know them today. And it's a way of explaining the meaning of the value of interdependence. Wilkes was one of the preachers who was called a circuit rider. She literally rode on a horse from one community to another, going around and helping to establish Universalists and Unitarian churches in the American West, including California. She was one of the first women ordained into ministry, not just UU ministry, but ministry overall. And part of a group of liberal women ministers who were known as the Iowa Sisterhood. You may have heard of them. They were working under a male minister at the time, but they were spreading the religion, and they did it often in their homes as teachers. Eliza Topper Wilkes also became part of the national suffrage movement in 1911 in California. And she was asked by the governor there to become a representative for the suffrage movement at the International Women's Suffrage Congress in Budapest in 1913. So she became known around the world. These are just a few snippets of her life work. And you can read more about her in the DUUB, the Dictionary of Unitarian Universalist Biography that is online. It is a fascinating read, but not a quick read. Now, let us look at an example of somebody who really captured that value of generosity in their life. Our religious heritage is just replete with people whose extraordinary generosity has inspired this basic value. There are literally thousands whose examples have shown the need for generosity and its role in creating a better world. One of the lesser known names is that of Annie Bissell Jordan Willis. She lived from 1893 to 1977. She was a teacher and a school principal. Okay, what is so extraordinary about that is that she continued the work of her father, who was a Unitarian minister by the name of Joseph Fletcher Jordan, and who was the principal of the Suffolk Normal School in Virginia. She educated hundreds of black children through several decades, at a time when they were not allowed into Virginia's public schools. There was no such thing as segregated schools. There were no schools where black children could go. It was a time when there was no public funding whatsoever for them, and she used her own money and fundraising to make that happen, tirelessly. Of course, she's also an example of a UU ancestor who has contributed in the area of racial justice and pluralism. But today specifically, when looking at the value of justice and its many dimensions, racial justice, social justice, judicial justice, human rights, when I'm thinking about this category, I feel compelled to mention the Unitarian minister Wade Still Sharp and his wife Martha Sharp, who together, during those terrible years, 1939 and 1940, when Nazi persecution placed the lives of thousands in jeopardy, they provided food and escape routes to literally thousands of people, most of them Jews, including children. And they also did the same with other persecuted people, like intellectuals who were persecuted. They worked in places like Prague, Lisbon in Portugal, and also in southern France, from which those escape routes often started. There are many such stories in our theological heritage. And justice just has become, obviously, a basic value that we cherish and that we practice as Unitarian Universalists. Now let us look at a couple of ancestors in the area of pluralism. What we mean by pluralism is that we celebrate all that we are all sacred beings, that we are diverse in culture, in experience, and in theology, and we value it all, we celebrate it all. And in this pluralist celebration, we are automatically turning to more recent years. It is without doubt that American liberal theology has had as its most significant achievement in the latter part of the 20th century the expansion of diversity and the enfolding, the encompassing of pluralism in all of its forms. Its early history of Unitarian Universalism has not been that gentle in terms of pluralism and diversity. Unitarian Universalism, like other liberal religions, has come to see the light more recently. So Unitarian Universalist theology has been part of this expansion of diversity and pluralism in our thinking. I would be remiss if I didn't at least mention the famous William Sinkford, and the Side with Love campaign, which has helped bring to pass the right to marriage in this country. We may hope that the Supreme Court does not reverse this landmark decision that made this happen. The decision at the Supreme Court that led to the acceptance of gay marriage, of same-sex marriage, was consolidated in the case of Obergefell versus Hodges in 2015, which held that the 14th Amendment of the Constitution guarantees the right to marry for same-sex couples, thus requiring all states as a result to perform and to recognize these marriages. And I want to mention that the group Musgin, which is an outgrowth of the Unitarian Social Justice Committee, at which these two people in 1939 and 1940 they were connected to that. But it now has outgrowths in Unitarian Universalist groups in each state. And in Michigan, we have the Michigan Unitarian Universalist Social Justice Network, which we affectionately call MUSGIN by its acronym. And on Tuesday evening, they are hosting, or co-hosting rather, a talk about the case of Obergefell versus Hodges and the right to marry and the possible dangers to that decision and the possible reversal under the current Supreme Court. May we hope that that is not the case. And for today, I want to mention two very recent UU ancestors, if you will, who have been very visible with regard to the value of pluralism. And I'm saying very visible because they were visible for several years in the general assemblies that are held each year by the Unitarian Universalist Association, our umbrella organization. And they began this work there in that pivotal year, 2017, when the General Assembly was held in New Orleans. There were thousands of people there. And the first of these two people is Elandria Williams, who I had the pleasure of encountering when I was at the 2017 General Assembly of the Unitarian Universalist Association in that huge convention hall in New Orleans. She was one of the co-moderators during the years 2017 and 2020. I also saw her in Spokane when she was doing that same work, Spokane, Washington, 2 years later. And 2017, among others, was also the year when Susan Frederick Gray was elected as the first female president of the Unitarian Universalist Association. And if we look back at the history, we can say of the Unitarian and of the Universalist associations that came before. In a recent article about Elandria that was published in UU World magazine, she is described as, if you have been at any of these meetings, you will know that these words fit her. She's described as indomitable, fierce, compassionate, dauntless. If you have seen her at work, you will agree these are good descriptors. She lived, and I'm now talking in past tense, she lived an intersectional life in that she was African American, not cisgender, living with disabilities, known by many nicknames and known by many pronouns. There's never anything specific that she identified with, but definitely not cisgender. And by cisgender, if you don't know, I mean the gender assigned, and I need to put that in quote, at birth, because that is also something that is in the news today, because now there has been a pronouncement that the gender we were assigned at birth has to be on our passport. But who assigns that? Not we. It's assigned by medical doctors, and depending on what you look like, they're going to say, well, that looks like one of these or one of those. These are scary times we live in. But back to Elandria and her non-cis gender identity or identities. She never was an ordained minister, and many of our UU ancestors are not or were not ordained ministers. she ministered through leadership and through attention to all the people who suffer, especially those who find themselves in those intersectional realities that she lived in. She was active for many years in the Unitarian Universalist Association and its many parts. She was tireless. She worked especially in relation to the centering of anti-racist practice in seminary training and in ministry. And here's why I'm talking about her in the past tense. She died suddenly in 2020. She had surgery, she had a heart procedure, she had complications, and she passed away. But her legacy is an example for many of us today, for both ministers and lay members of congregations. And I cannot mention Elandria Williams without also mentioning the Reverend Mr. Barb Grieve, who was our co-moderator at the Unitarian Universalist assemblies. Barb Grieve is transgender and says that he is, this is a quote, grateful for the life-saving, loving acceptance that our faith has provided throughout his life. Barb Grieve has served in a variety of capacities, including being a long-time member of the UUA staff. He grew up in Farmington, Massachusetts. We went to school, but then he received his Master of Divinity from the Star King School, which is the other school, as I call it, because I was educated at the Meadville Lombard Theological School when I did my Master of Divinity degree. And these two schools are the prime schools that potential ministers come out of, and also chaplains. Barb Grieve went on to also serve on the board of trustees for the Star King School. And he is the co-founder of a group that is also known by its acronym. If you follow any of the history and realities of the Unitarian Universalist Association, you know there are many groups and they all have acronyms, and most of them have the letters U and U in them. So this one is, you can call it trust, but it's really TRUU, lowercase s, capital T, which stands for the Transgender Religious UUs Together group. And Barb Grieve says that this is amazing to me. He says he loves committee work and board meetings because he believes that it is by doing the business of the UU faith that we can continue its important ministries. May there be more people like him. So this is one reason why I chose these particular ancestors for today. Taken together, they span a history of increasing pluralism, geographic expansion, social and political activism, expression of gender pluralism, and justice, judicial justice, and social justice, and human rights. The story of Elandria shows that such ancestors are not just in our ancestry roots of long gone by, but they come out of congregations today, congregations such as ours. And may that happen more often. May we also send forth ancestors to add to this group and perhaps be in the DUUB one day. May it indeed be so. Amen and blessed. Let us now rise in body or spirit for our closing hymn, which is number 287 in the Grey Hymnal, Faith of the Larger Liberty. That is number 287.